ideating. This is our focus group, but it's a focus group of customers, early adopters per se, in each one of the new beers that comes out. But it's a way for us to, in the early onslaught of the company, we had no money, and we were able to get dollars that came in, and in the form of pre-orders, because we would say, hey, we're having this vote. You vote on a beer, the beer wins. Originally, our company, you casted a vote by making a pre-order in that batch. So we would at least cover our raw materials cost for every batch before we even brewed it. And then we would brew that batch of beer. We would get more pre-orders coming in all the while. And then by the time the beer released, we would sell all of that product out to customers that had placed an order ahead of time.
Welcome to Over a Pint, where we focus on the fast-paced and ever-changing world of marketing told through the eyes of industry veterans with decades of in-the-trenches experience. No theory here. This is real-world practical experience told to you by those that have been there, and that always includes our guests. So grab a pint of your favorite local brewski or whatever your choice of drink may be, and join us for the show. As always, I am joined by my better half, Mr. Pat McGovern, new biz director at Acedia, an award-winning digital shop here in Milwaukee. And I'm Kurt Lingle, vice president at Celtic, a full-service ad agency headquartered in Milwaukee's historic Third Ward neighborhood. So Pat, 2022 has been one heck of a year for the Over a Pint Marketing Podcast. While the name of the marketing podcast is Over a Pint, we certainly have brought on brands from all walks of life, but it is always super cool to invite brands on from the beer industry, and all of our guests have just been phenomenal over the past few years. Here's what I love about the craft beer industry and having these folks on. In addition to making a product that Pat and I enjoy so much, it's become very clear to us on the podcast over the past few years that this industry is comprised of some of the most entrepreneurial and creative folks that you'll ever meet. And in some cases, they had to be ultra creative in their thinking just to keep their heads above water with all that's been thrown at them the last few years. And that really is the case for the hospitality industry in general. From a marketing perspective, this industry is about as roll up your sleeves and experimental as you'll find. But beyond the beer itself, local breweries, craft breweries are such huge and important economic and tourism drivers for any city. They bring folks into local neighborhoods, they keep folks there, and they truly understand the importance of what a small business means to a local community. And so often they're just good neighbors, good corporate neighbors to have. They just provide so much. So today we are super excited to have another great craft brewery on. We're excited to have HenrySchwartz, president, co-founder of MobCraft, joining us. So Henry, welcome to Over a Pint.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So Henry, we have a tradition on Over a Pint. It's called Over a Pint for a reason. We like to go around the horn with our guests, and usually they share with us what form of liquid they're enjoying, whether it's tea, water, coffee, beer. I think in this case, there's going to be no surprise, but let's give it a shot. Henry, what are you doing here on Over a Pint? What are you enjoying?
I got some water. Well, that and a beer, of course. So I don't have a pint here today, but I got a 10-ounce pour of our Crush passion fruit mango. Figured since it's noon my time right now, this is a little bit of a breakfast drink. It's kind of a weird phenomenon in the beer world, the smoothie beer. It's just about as much pureed fruit as it is beer, but pretty tasty beer. Clocks in at 6% ABV, and it is just a smoothie.
Awesome.
Nice.
Hey, Pat, let's start with you. You're not going to shock me, I'm sure, but for our listeners, for our viewers, what are you enjoying?
No, well, let's play it up right away. We've got an advent calendar of beer, a beer wall behind us, and day one, I had to open this already. This was supplied to us by MobCraft. Day one is Batshit Crazy, which is a coffee brown ale, which sounds freaking delicious right now. Thanks to MobCraft for that. So that's what I'm going to be enjoying today.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you know what? Let's get right to it as well. And I too am enjoying an advent calendar from MobCraft. And this is cool. And we'll talk about it later. We'll have it, we'll promote it. But folks, I'm telling you right now, we've all had advent calendars, right? You open it up and there's a piece of chocolate. You open up each day of the month, and inside you're going to find a brew from MobCraft. Now, how cool is that? So it's great to have a guest on that allows us to bring something like this onto the show. So Henry, this was pretty cool. So I love this advent calendar. I think everyone's you can still buy it, right? It's still available. I was in there over the weekend. People were picking them up. Is it still available for sale?
Yep. We're down to our last couple in the tap room now. So if you don't pick it up kind of by the middle of December, you might be out of luck, but there's still some out there.
Folks, get in there and buy your advent calendar and have a beer or two while you're there. It's so cool. And by
actually,
the way,
if you get one, you get a buy one, get one free coupon when you come and pick it up. So, you know,
I saw some people enjoying that on Sunday. They were doing that very much. They were doing the very same thing. But I too am having the batshit crazy. Very cool. So anyway, this is awesome. So anyway, all right, Henry, before we get into the conversation, if you could, for our listeners, give us the elevator speech for MobCraft so that, you know, they know very quickly who you are, what you do, and what makes you a little bit different from, say, another brewery down the street. So just give us the elevator speech really quickly, if you could.
You bet. So MobCraft's the world's first crowdsourced brewery, and we like to go by the tagline that we turn ideas into beer. It's definitely evolved over the course of time since we've started, which was in 2013. But we started with that thought process of going to our fans, saying, what do you want to drink? And then taking one of those beers and putting it up for vote, brewing it, and releasing it to the world. So we're on, this year will be our 10-year anniversary, and I think we've got our 100th beer that's going to hit sometime around the month of June, our 100th crowdsourced beer. So it's been so much fun over the course of time, going to our fans, asking them what they want, turning that idea into a beer, and when the beers have been really enjoyed and people have asked for them again on social, those are the ones that have made it into our core lineup of beers that you see rotating through seasonally.
That's awesome. That's and obviously a very unique concept for the first of its kind that you brought to the table. So it's very cool. So, all right. So we're going to talk more about your brewery, but you know what? Behind every company are people, right? That's all businesses are based on, you know, the types of people that engineer and are behind the company itself. Henry, I've had a chance to chat with you one-on-one. I had a chance to come down and visit with you, and your background is very unique in a good way and very impressive. If you could, just tell folks your background, like just
sure,
you know, where you came from and how you came to be, if you will.
Well, I came to be when two parents got together back.
I knew you. It was a toss I gave you.
My life started out in Denver, Colorado. My mom was from Wisconsin. My dad was from, originally he was born in Nebraska, but settled in Colorado, and that's where they met. So where I was born and spent the first 15 years of my life. It was 1995. My dad passed away when I was really young, and my mom and I didn't really know what to do. So we just left the U.S. for a year and went backpacking. My mom had been to Mexico once, and that was about it. And, you know, in 95 with, you know, no cell phones and very little internet, we decided to do a, you know, year round the world trip. So I go back and look at a lot of my formative memories and, you know, how I go through and think about things and, you know, solve problems. And a lot of that is due to, you know, being a 6-year-old in South Africa right after apartheid was lifted, or losing my first tooth in the Himalayas. There are just so many things that were completely off the wall from any childhood's upbringing that have all kind of filtered down into who I am today. And a lot of that comes from, you know, a mom who was really, you know, passionate and loving and encouraging, and just kind of letting me, you know, shoot for my goals and not ever kind of underestimating, you know, potential and what could be done.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, fast forward from there, you know, I had always loved, you know, this concept of entrepreneurship. You know, mom kind of taught me, if you want to, you know, do something, go out and do it. You know, one of the taglines that she's kind of coined is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? then just do it. It's like, it's so simple. You can just push everything out of the way. What's the worst thing that could happen? If this, adventure goes wrong, or if this financial decision ends up being the wrong one, you're still going to be here. You can still pick yourself back up and keep going. So yeah, I grew up in Colorado. I fell in love with skateboarding when I was in about 5th grade. And that's when my entrepreneurial sense started to grow. I would buy a bunch of blank skateboards on eBay and paint my own graphics on them and turn around and sell them at the skate park. And then I would, always have a couple decks for my own use, so I didn't ever have to spend any money buying my own skateboards. We kind of pulled up out of Denver, Colorado, and moved to Wisconsin when I was going into high school. And it was pretty abrupt, but that love for skateboarding kind of carried me through to finding my first group of friends. And after the first year of being in Wisconsin, I went to the local skateboard store and asked them for a job, and they said that they were unfortunately closing. So I went back home and was like, Mom, I can't get a job at the skate shop. I'm kind of bummed. I'm going to have to look elsewhere. And then she said, well, why not? And I said, well, they're going to close. They couldn't make it. And she said, well, why don't you buy it? I'm like, Mom, I'm 15 years old. I can't buy a skateboard store. She's like, yes, you can. You love it. And I'm sure you could do it. So we went back to the store and, asked how much they wanted for the skateboard store. Found out they wanted like $5,000. So I was like, cool, great. This is awesome. So I ended up buying a skateboard store at 15 with my mom's money and, was able to pay her back over the course of the years being open, and ran that throughout my whole entire high school career.
Wow.
Okay. Wait a minute. And we gotta unpack this a little bit before we get into the.
Hey Pat, I don't think I heard of I knew everything about Henry up to. I don't think he told me the skateboarding story. So
this is correct, Henry. So, I mean, the obvious question is, like, what the hell did you know about even running a store? I mean, like something like that. I mean, God bless your mother, who just seems like just a badass woman, like in the best way possible. But I mean, day one, okay, now, getting the money is kind of the easy thing. Like, okay, you guys have it, you write the check, here you go. Like, where do you start? Like, what, what?
Yeah, it was cool in the sense that it was 100% unique, come up with it on your own learning, which nobody does anymore. We're always told everything, or Google something, or look at YouTube for some reason to come up with, So all of this wasn't from a textbook or some foundation that I had ever learned.
Right.
There were a couple things that, as I got towards the end of running the store and I was a senior in school, I was going into a business class in school where there were some things that transpired. But, it was literally, I have friends who also ride skateboards. I go to the skateboard store. I advertise my business by, word of mouth and, being my customer, basically. And all of my friends, all the other kids from the skateboard store knew that I was the one who owned the skate shop. And it came up to just imploring cool ideas, like all of your vendors send out catalogs. And instead of picking stuff, I just went to the skate park and I had people circle things that they wanted. And when more than 2 or 3 people circled the same thing, I was like, oh, people will buy that one. So it's things that aren't that amazing and crazy, but, just thinking outside the box of, instead of trying to come up with how you solve a problem, and somebody can solve the problem for you, that's one of your customers, go to them.
What's interesting is, and one of the things I love about doing the podcast, and I mean this genuinely, I love hearing everyone's story. We all have stories. And that was one thing that struck me about you when we met for the first time. And I didn't know a lot about you. And I just started asking questions. I think my first question might've been like, I don't know, do you like the outdoors? Or we had something in common with the Ice Age Trail because you were holding an event. And you just started going off. I'm like, oh, I backpacked for a year, this and that. But it's interesting, Henry, and I told Pat this. I said, it's interesting. It makes perfect sense. Here's an entrepreneur who did this when he was younger. And you're absolutely right. It's like travel can be very scary to people. It's the unknown. And when you kind of conquer that, or that's part of your DNA from an early age, that's a nice foundation for what is to come, whether it's starting a business or not being afraid to lose, risk, whatever it might be. So you go to college, and I'm just going to ask the question, were you bored? Because I know what you studied in college. So it's like, that's like when you got to college, you start studying. I mean, did it bore you?
Yeah, great question.
No, not at all, because that was kind of really the first time that I went into fundamentals. when I look back, the things that went the most horribly wrong at the skateboard store was that I closed it and I sold everything, including the computer that had all my financial records. Come tax season, what do? It's like those things that didn't cross your mind as a 16-year-old. Like, hey, I got to go to college, or an 18-year-old. Hey, I got to go to college. I tried to sell the skateboard store a couple times, couldn't. Ended up liquidating the inventory, took all the skateboards and snowboards and energy drinks and frisbee golf discs to my dorm room and pedaled them out of there. So the things that I didn't know when I was running things on my own, I'm just making stuff up as I go. Then that got some formative knowledge behind it as I hit college. And, as much as the, educational rigor was at the university, the social aspect was so important as well. Being able to live off campus, being able to, my best friends were all the international students, right? So we'd have international student dinners every week, and somebody would come over and bring a food from their culture, and just was not bored at all.
Okay, so let's do this then. Let's just connect the dots right away, because obviously we want to talk about the industry, about your business. Let's connect the dots. So you're in college. How did this all come to be? Where was the idea? How did MobCraft start? Where did you get exposed to the industry? Dive in.
So, funny story. That skateboard store led me to bring a lot of inventory to the dorms. There was this girl who lived on our dorm room floor that we wanted to move in off campus with us. She was just an awesome friend. So we conned her into moving in by saying, you can have this pair of snowboard boots if you move into our house with us. And her name's Kayla. She's MobCraft's director of operations now. And we've just been best buds for 20 years now, it seems. Yeah, 20 years. So, the first product that we made was actually wine. We got a bunch of grapes. I have no clue what vineyard they were from. My business partner brought them over. We stomped on them in buckets and fermented this really bad wine as a bunch of 19-year-olds. And thought, well, this is really fun to go through the process and make it and watch the little bubbles ferment in in your carboy and the airlocks. But thought, it's not overly challenging. We should try to make beer instead. So we made 2 batches of beer that were recipes from a kit. And then it just went off the rails after that. Like, oh, cool. Let's make a stout. Well, there's mint in the garden right now. Let's throw some of that mint into the stout and make a mint chocolate stout. And then we got this beer that tasted like this Andes thin mint, and it was so delicious. We're like, oh, cool. You can come up with so many great flavors for beer that are not the fizzy yellow stuff. And we, came up with some more of our ideas. Then we started going to our friends and saying, what do you want us to brew this week? What do you want us to brew this week? We were brewing like 75 gallons on a weekend. We had 9 beers on tap in our basement.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And we still weren't the popular kids. But we had a lot of fun doing it. And like batshit crazy, the beer that you all are trying, that was the first beer that was like this crowdsourced model. When we really, if you read the back of it, it's submitted by Abby and Allie Murphy. They were 2 twins that we went to school with. They wanted a coffee beer that wasn't a big 10% ABV stout, something that was a little bit lighter and more approachable on the palate, but still had this really robust coffee forward flavor. So that was kind of the first crowdsourced beer that really came through. That was this whole, you create a beer based off of these concepts that are bouncing around my brain. And then at that point, we were like, cool, this could definitely be a business model. Everybody and their mother wants to start a brewery, but that's mostly either somebody who likes beer, who's just making the beers that they want and then trying to sell them to the public. We've got this great idea of going to the public, asking them what they want, and then producing that product.
So
Henry,
this seems to be a continual theme with you, is reaching out to customers, getting that immediate feedback and going, okay, now I'll make a product to go with that, as opposed to a lot of businesses that go the other way around, thinking, I think I have something here. Let me try to sell it.
I always call it our revenue generating marketing plan. It's like we're going through and we're ideating. This is our focus group, but it's a focus group of customers, early adopters per se, in each one of the new beers that comes out. But it's a way for us to, in the early onslaught of the company, we had no money, and we were able to get dollars that came in, and in the form of pre-orders, because we would say, hey, we're having this vote. You vote on a beer, the beer wins. Originally, our company, you casted a vote by making a pre-order in that batch. So we would at least cover our raw materials cost for every batch before we even brewed it. And then we would brew that batch of beer. We would get more pre-orders coming in all the while. And then by the time the beer released, we would sell all of that product out to customers that had placed an order ahead of time.
Henry, give us a sense of just years. When is this happening? When are you doing this? Like ballpark range? Yeah.
Yeah, let's take this whole ball of ideas that I spit at you and put some years behind it. 2011 was kind of when we came up with the concept of a crowdsourced brewery. So those were the college days. We were in a business incubator at UW Whitewater to just get those initial ideas off the ground. 2012, we formed the LLC, and we started considering different options for how we could finance it. Started going to banks. Started finding different options for how we could actually make our dream come to reality. And that's when we found out that the best way to make it happen was through partnering up with an existing brewery that had extra capacity, because no lenders would give us any money. We couldn't find any investors. I mean, like I pitched everybody in Wisconsin, it seemed like hundreds of people over and over again. Once we finally, found a brewery that said you can come in and brew your monthly crowdsourced batch here, that's what helped us get those first batches out to the market, get a little bit of revenue, get a little bit of traction, and then eventually, stockpile enough cash, enough reserves and financial data to show banks that we could take this idea and turn it into beer, generate revenue, and so on.
Go ahead, Henry. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, so that concept of, brewing at someone else's place, we did that until about 2015. And then we were finally able to, get financed in 2016 and build the facility that we're sitting in right now, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And the location is great. Here's what's kind of cool. And Pat, I was tracking with your thinking too. I jotted down here. What I love about what you did here, Henry, is it was a unique concept. Whether you realized it or not, you all were just you were doing something really cool early on like this. It was a unique concept, service driven. That's something that any business can benefit from. So there is a service perspective here, because now you said it earlier on. It's like most businesses push the product to a customer and say, here's my product. What you're doing is you're reversing it and saying, hey, we're going to listen to our customers, and we're going to kind of make this all about you and have you put your stamp on it, and you have a little ownership. Not to mention you have a lot of marketing play on that as well. Competitive advantage, and I like the low risk. There's ways around that where you're not dumping all your eggs into one basket with inventories and things like that. So it's pretty cool. You're pitching, so you're going around, you're pitching this concept. So there's some salesmanship here, obviously, that you had to learn or you were good at. Talk to us a little bit about what that was like. So without going into too much detail, were there any doors that you knocked on that might be fun to share? What was that process like? How did you prepare for the pitch? Talk to us about that, because that fascinates me.
Well, yeah, a lot of this came out of college. So I went to Whitewater. There's a huge collegiate entrepreneurs organization chapter there, and I was the president of that organization. I was on the board every year from like freshman year on. So just a really fun group that was all centered about entrepreneurship and ideas and pitching and elevator pitches and business plan competitions and so on. So coming out of that, we actually submitted MobCraft to the governor's business plan competition in Madison, and we ended up winning that. So we were able to, jump right out of college and, go into coming up with a financing plan for the business, having that like, hey, winner of the governor's business plan competition accolade. And from there, we went to all of the normal institutional investors that you would go to as a startup, because we kind of, we lived in the startup ecosystem with all the other tech companies that were popping up, and we're like, hey, we are putting a tech spin on beer, and this concept of a brewery that isn't just hard brick and mortar. We need a lot of capital to buy a lot of stainless to, slowly grow. We had this concept that was e-commerce focused, that was, using the internet, that was using, actual consumers' input. But when we went in to meet with investors, time and time again, just it didn't work out. We didn't get any financing. We didn't get anybody to bite. The most notable, we went on SharkTank and pitched the concept. And that was probably in 2013 or 14 or so that we were on the show. It was a blast being on there. I was in the tank for about 40 minutes, just going back and forth with all of the different sharks. But at the end of the day, most of them didn't know anything about alcohol beverage world. So they were, not really interested from just it not being their domain. And the ones that didn't want us to have this brick and mortar aspect of the brewery. They wanted us to be more of a marketing concept that outsourced some of the capacity to other breweries. And we decided not to, take that deal, not to go down that route, because we had spent a few years using somebody else's brewery and had, firsthand experience of the pain in the ass of our production not fitting a contract brewery's production schedule. You go from 1 month making an Agosa that takes, 6 weeks to create with 1,000 pounds of grapefruit in it to a, barrel-aged barley wine that sits in oak barrels for a year to, an IPA that turns around in 2 weeks. You can't really contain that beast.
Yeah. You know what strikes me is, and I will say this too, we've told other guests who have been in the industry, we've said the same thing. It's like, if you are in a beer town in particular, there's no excuse to have a bad beer. So, I mean, and I mean, like, if I go in and I have a bad beer somewhere, I'm going somewhere else. So your product, it's good. I'm telling folks, it's good. Obviously, you've got a great reputation. Yep. The beer is delicious, and it's good stuff. But you strike me. It's interesting because we've met some folks, and it's like, I'm always curious, like, when it comes to entrepreneurs in the beer industry, craft beer, whatever we want, however we're defining this. In some ways, they came to the business through the love of beer first. And I'm listening to your story, and it's not to say that there wasn't an appreciation, but before you even started talking about beer, you were painting this picture about this individual who was like all about entrepreneurship. It almost seems like you found beer versus it. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting way to look at it. I always hate, like, I'm a business person, because that sounds so cold and corporate. It just, I feel this is definitely a lifestyle business. This isn't a, it's not something that I'm going to be an extraordinarily rich individual off of running, but I came at it as I love creating, and I love the aspect of not necessarily even being my own boss, but being able to see and have a team surround me that comes up with cool ideas and concepts. So when we started, I always said, I let Andrew brew, he lets me business. And that's kind of how it came to be, is that my business partner, who's a microbiologist, was really the one that focused in on the science side of the beer. And I was really the one that focused in on the sales and marketing side of things. And then we, both threw our hands up in the air when we, quit everything we love just to be, HR and finance.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, we fired ourselves from that we dislike and are back to just, running the company.
Henry, I got to ask you a couple of things, and I want to get into the Shark Tank thing just because that's such a big brand, and your experience on there is, it's not something you run into every day. But I want to, before we dive into that, talk to us, and picking up on a little bit of what Kurt was asking before, is when you're going out on these pitches, you seem like you have a nice head of steam going, but you run into some difficulties. Why are people saying no to you? One, back then, and two, how much of your pitch is changing from person to organization to organization? How are you crafting that in order to respond to folks?
Sure. The biggest thing is it's like impractical to pitch a hockey stick curve in your revenue when you're a brewery. It's not something that just goes like this. And when I'm pitching tech investors who are looking for the next buyout from Google, like, that's just different in the beer world. I mean, in any other retail world, all the food and beverage world. Yes, there are those acquisitions that everybody has heard of because they've hit the headlines. Your Ballast Point selling for $1 billion, but that's never going to happen again. So it's very hard to get an institutional investor to back a company that just has steady growth over time. So that's where it really comes into that percent return that people are looking for. If an investor is looking to, average 20% return off of their whole entire portfolio, they have to think it's plausible for your business to generate, a 200% return to balance out for all the turds that are going to be in their investments that just don't make it. Sure. So in this business, just I couldn't lie to people to say that I'm going to get these types of revenues and numbers. So I think that's the biggest part is, having solid financials is the most important part for any business. But as you're going to approach these, institutional investors versus banks versus friends and family, that's really where the difference lies, I guess, for a startup at least.
Right. Let's talk to us a little bit about Shark Tank, and start here, Henry, if you don't mind. Like, how did you guys decide? It's like, yeah, let's go for this. Let's And what was that experience? I'm sure you get this all the time, but like, what was that
No,
experience like?
it's a fun story. I love telling it.
Yeah,
I was
please.
delivering kegs to a bar called Drakenberg's in Madison. It's a cigar bar. And I picked up the phone because when you're in sales, if you don't know the number, somebody might want to buy something. 100% of the time, it's a telemarketer. But this time, it was Shark Tank's casting company that they had read an article on Yahoo Foods about batshit crazy. And they were like, oh, this is, looks like a cool concept. We think you should apply for the show. So after the fact, I learned that they take about 90% inbound people make it on the show, and 10% is their, casting crew doing outreach. So we were one of those lucky, 10% to somehow be found on the internet. And I think still to this date, we were the only brewery that was on Shark Tank. There have been different alcohol companies, but so I think for that reason, beer was hot, a cool beer company with a cool concept that was currently fundraising. So they called, we went through their application process, which was a series of, written and video interviews, a bunch of stuff that I've sworn to secrecy not to tell, otherwise they'll fine me a bunch. But we ended up flying down there, or they flew me out to California in probably 6-8 months after that initial connection.
Okay.
And it was very much like, here's a bunch of information, wait, give us more information, here's a bunch of information, wait, we'll fly you out next week. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then once I got down there, it was really, pretty true to the show that you don't talk to the sharks ahead of time. You're standing behind a door, the door opens, you walk up, you stand on an X, and then they say go, and you just start dialoguing.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So you get out there, you do your thing. They come back to you with, hey, some just don't get it. Others want a different kind of variation. Was it hard at that point to turn it down, or or was it like, no, you had a pretty good idea of what you wanted before you got there?
Yeah. I don't ever get so incredibly hung up on one thing coming to fruition that I will break when it doesn't, because nothing ever comes. It's like you hit, as an entrepreneur, you pitch 1,000 investors, you get one who's interested. So going on the Shark Tank, that would be awesome if we were able to get a deal with one of the sharks. But there were 4.5 million people that were watching the episode the first time it aired, and it still re-airs every 3 months or so. So I don't know that, compounded number of eyeballs that we get just from being on the show. But it was funny throughout the whole entire time. I brought down a flight of beers. They tried everything. Some of the beers they loved, the Vanilla Wafer Porter, for instance, an early on crowdsourced beer that we still make. All the judges loved that one. I brought on sours. All the judges did not like the sours. Like Mark Cuban even spit it out on stage, which was pretty ridiculous.
I want to talk a little bit more about your brand. This is a marketing podcast. We lean heavy into brand. Brand's very important to us. And, I guess if you could, Henry, talk to us about your brand from, because again, I always use this as the caveat. Your product is really good, so check that box. But every business, whether it's an advertising agency, whether it's a bank, whatever, everyone has a different vibe. Everyone has a different personality. I want to know about your brand's personality. Talk to us about your face, your voice, your vibe. What's that like, and how does that breathe into your culture?
Yeah, can y'all hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think that's probably one of our biggest errors over the course of time. You can ideate and you can improve beers and recipes and make them better. In 2013, we made a bunch of really crappy beer. We still have a bunch of people out there who will never drink our brands because they've tried beers that were not awesome. But when you get a brand out there, you can't really go back. So although our logo is really cool and it gets the point across, I mean, it's a speech bubble that has, the mob and the craft coming together to design the beers. And I like it, but, it's not something that we've ever taken the time or, felt that we could, wholeheartedly improve upon. So it's like we've got this little disconnect as far as our ethos as a company and our company culture, and then, what collectively our brand looks like. So we're in the first early stages of looking at a whole entire rebrand of what MobCraft looks like. And we didn't go through those common exercises of like, MobCraft makes sense to us because it's a mob of people and craft brewers coming together to make those beers, but it has nothing to do with the mafia. And, we get that a lot of times. So
sure.
I think if we would have went through those early on exercises from a professional standpoint, we would have, definitely gone a different direction. From the branding perspective, I mean, we have really, really cool can art and every one on an individual scale is awesome. I mean, the advent calendars, that box looks so snazzy. That's just been our designer's evolution over the course of time from, another college student to a professional designer. But yeah, that's something that we're definitely going to be, that's a 2023 plan. It's like getting the cohesion behind who we are, what our brand is. I always say from a brand ethos perspective and our company culture, like we're a hodgepodge of misfits almost, like we're passionate people, and that's what it all drives down to. We all have a very similar personality that, we're all kind and we're all genuine humans. And it's really fun. Like some of the admin staff that I have hired, some of their interview questions are like, are you a good person? Like it sounds so weird to ask that in an interview, but that's the kind of things that have bubbled out of, this making sure that you really enjoy who you're surrounded by.
Sure.
So I don't know how you put that into any kind of sense of planning or whatnot, but it's like the number one positive comment we get out of annual reviews is just like, I genuinely love the people that I'm around and I like to be here.
Well, Henry, I would say this. I think you answered the question really well. That is a part of your DNA, and that's kind of where I was going. It's how the brand gets brought to life is, that's to be determined, or as you're working through. But it's at the end of the day, you are who you are. It's like you can try to improve yourself, and companies go through the same thing. It's like, how do I how do I make myself better? But that's who you are, your culture. And even when you were talking earlier on, like, hey, I think you were sharing the story of one of your classmates who now heads up operations. To me, that speaks to the culture, to the DNA, part of the, what you have going on there. Obviously, how this gets brought to life is happening before our eyes, but you definitely, you get a vibe. I guess from a marketing perspective, I don't want to ever dwell on the past because we just came out of some hard years, but I want to talk a little bit about the creativity about, you had to go through, during the hard years of COVID, and maybe just talk to us a little bit about what you are doing then from a marketing perspective. Like, what are you doing? How do you get people exposed to your brand? How do you get people in? How are you crisscrossing them? Talk to us a little bit about your strategies today.
Yeah. Well, if I go off on a tangent, remind me, we got to talk about Denver because that has a whole marketing side to it that's just blowing my mind. But COVID really threw some crazy stuff at us. I mean, it was just like this time, a week from now in 2020 that we were out of cash and we were going to lay everybody off the second week of January. So we made all those announcements, told everybody minus 5 people that, there was no more work to be done at MobCraft. We had our plan to like Henry bartends on Tuesdays, really skeleton crew to just make the ships sail. But then PPP came out like the day after we told all of our staff that we were laying everybody off. So fortunately, we didn't have to lay anybody off. But in those conversations, we had a handful of staff say, I can float for 3 months. I can float for 6 months. Let's just keep going and make it through this. So, I mean, to have that, dedication from people to say, like, I'll keep trucking was so amazing. And that just filtered straight down into the ideas that came up with. Because we, we're sitting in this tap room and we had to close the doors, so we had to paint, all the windows. Like, do we still have beer for sale? And what ideas are we going to come up with? The March, like the last weekend in March is always our Sour Fest. And obviously COVID shutdowns in Milwaukee started that weekend. So we had this whole huge sour beer festival that was planned that we had to take virtual. And this is, way before any of us knew what Zoom was, but we were able to pivot. We had about $14,000 in ticket sales that we were going to either have to refund or do something with. We ended up refunding about $1,000 worth of stuff to people because we were able to pivot, fun, virtual. And we're like, wow, this was very successful. Virtual Sour Fest, people love doing. We ended up doing 48 different virtual pairings over the course of COVID and brought in, about $100,000 worth of revenue just from those virtual pairings. And we were some people's like sanity throughout the pandemic, where every week they'd come, pick up their kit, go back home. We'd all jump on Zooms over the course of the weekend. I mean, sometimes it would spiral into people playing beer pong at the end of it. Sometimes it would just be like everybody's on mute and they're all playing musical instruments in the background. Sometimes just people showing their cats. But we were able to make this, little community of people who attended our virtual events throughout the pandemic. So that was awesome. Marissa, our bar manager, said, well, we've got growlers to go, but, sometimes people don't want 4 pints worth of the same beer. We have a kombucha company that operates in MobCraft that makes 16-ounce bottles. So we call them pints to go. From a marketing perspective, a pint to go for like $4 is pretty sweet compared to a $7 pint that you would buy normally. And that's actually getting us closer to our margin that we generate off of taproom sales. So Marissa just saying like, hey, let's sell pints to go instead of a 16-ounce growler, we were able to generate another like 80 grand worth of just that individual product.
Wow.
And then obviously the advent calendar is behind you. All of our bars, we lost 100% of our draft revenue. And we had all of this beer, all this vintage beer, all sorts of things that we had been aging that were like, well, now's the time that we want to sell this product, but we don't have anywhere for it to go. So we took the 36 different beers we had in the cooler and were able to package them into 24 slots of an advent calendar. That first year we were like, yeah, let's make 2,000 of these. And we sold them out in like a week and a half.
Wow.
And that's our number one selling product, both in revenue and volume now, just from that COVID idea of what are we going to do with this leftover beer?
You know what I was thinking about, how a lot of times a lot of businesses weren't ready for COVID. And I was thinking, Pat, I don't think COVID was ready for MobCraft. I mean, it's just when I hear, seriously, it's like, how you maneuvered your way through, and it gets back to, again, it's the foundation, that creativity, the entrepreneurship, things like that. Where is this industry at right now? Talk to us a little bit about, obviously there's beer is popping up everywhere. And like I said earlier, I think it's cool because it's like, it's really becoming this little micro tourism for neighborhoods. There's something cool kind of going on, but at the end of the day, it's still competition. Talk to us about what you're seeing. It's like, okay, take Milwaukee and then let's go to Denver, because I want to make sure we hit Denver too, because you just popped up in a very competitive industry in our market in Denver. But what are you seeing, Henry? Can this sustain forever, or like just what's the environment like in your industry?
Yeah, it's scary. Running into, like, we've definitely seen the effects of people's discretionary income and disposable income going down. We've got expensive beer and there's cheap beer out there. I mean, craft beer is definitely a luxury item, and we're seeing that effect go out there. I think the hardest, most competitive spot to be in is the package industry and the packaged products, out on a grocery store shelf and fighting over draft lines at a bar. Because at the end of the day, there are so many breweries out there. Nobody is brand loyal. That doesn't matter at all. They're going to walk into a bar and they're going to want, I'm an IPA fan. I want to drink an IPA. Whatever your IPA is, I'm going to buy. The bar owner is going to buy whatever cheapest IPA they can find. So you're really just getting into a price war in the distribution side of things, which is a little bit frightening because, our brewery is still pretty large in the grand scheme of things. There's about 225 breweries in the state of Wisconsin, and I think we're like the 25th or 28th largest brewery, which to me, I still feel like we're a very small brewery, but we rely on, packaged product being out there. We rely on things like the advent calendar. That's a big chunk of our volume that we put out every year. So getting into that price war, like, we're not big enough to have economies of scale when it comes down to hitting those really low price points. It's really frightening for smaller breweries who might be, a tenth the size that we are. If they need to rely on that, then it's impossible. So for instance, in Denver, for us to brew a batch of beer, on average, it's about 70 cents per pint that goes out the door, just to get that beer made. In Milwaukee, it's about 35 cents per pint. So if you can imagine, as you double, in size and get bigger and bigger than us, that continues to go down.
Right.
So what we've taken our approach in from the business standpoint is to figure out how we can use the economies of scale that we have brewing in Milwaukee and the staff that we have who, are paid salary rates of Milwaukee individuals, and be able to have more retail outlets that we can generate revenue through. So this Denver location, we're working on a location in Northern Illinois, also working on another one that's south of us here in Wisconsin. So taking that ability to make 900 gallons of beer at a crack and have a director of finance and a director of HR that kind of oversee all locations. That's how we're kind of approaching this, instead of, just trying to cram more volume of beer out to farther areas. because a craft brewery from Wisconsin isn't relevant in Pennsylvania. I mean, nobody cares. Even if we sold a ton of beer in Michigan, nobody cares about MobCraft in Michigan. We have no brand recognition or relevancy other than the couple advent calendars that we sell.
So speaking of one of my final questions, Denver, obviously, it's a part of your past, right? It's like you spent a number of years, but I mean, you're jumping into Denver. That's how did that come to be? If it's not like you're jumping into, hey, we're going to open up a joint in a small. Denver is a big market, very competitive, a lot of good beer, and you're in a good location too. It's like I know where you've got a nice location in terms of proximity. You know what I'm saying? You're not off the beaten path. So how did this come to be in Denver? What made you decide, and how did you get that one up and running?
Yeah, so for about 5 years, I've wanted to do a MobCraft Denver with my cousins down there, and always looking at Pro Brewer, which is a website that lists brewery-related things for sale. And this location popped up that was a brewery restaurant that just went out of business, and most of the infrastructure was there. Wow. So looking at it, it's like, well, you could drop $4 million to build a new place, or rent a place, and rents were market rate rents with a brewery and restaurant inside. So from that standpoint, we just thought, man, this location's here. Let's figure out why this brewery that was here previously failed, and let's see if we can do it better. So the brewery that was there previously was more of a higher end food joint and made a really unique specialty type of beer that was a wine beer hybrid. So we asked the neighbors, what do you want instead? They said IPAs and pizza, burgers, or tacos. So we said, cool, let's go out and find a food partner that might want to do one of these things. And through my cousin, I got connected to a taco joint down in Pueblo, Colorado that was also looking to expand. And we said, hey, do you want to go in business together? You do the food, we do the beer. And we came to an agreement. They took on some of the liability of the facility. We took on the other half of the liability. And it was a great way to not have a huge undertaking, be able to split that with another passionate business owner. And then obviously, combine forces from the sales and marketing front to get the word out there. So I think what last thing on that, why a huge part of that facility is what I want to continue to duplicate and focus on is the customer experience side of it. So as consumers, we are fickle. We want things to be easy. It used to be cool to go to the coolest, newest, hippest craft brewery and go get a beer, go over to the food truck. You got a tab over here, you got a tab over there. You're doing 10 different transactions. You're waiting for food. Your beer's done. There are still some fans that want to do that. But at the end of the day, people want to come in, get served, get high quality stuff, have a great time, and leave. So that's why we decided to kind of take the two businesses together instead of just getting a food truck out front and splitting it up. So really focusing on that customer experience.
I'm not surprised at all when the idea behind Denver gets back to your roots. You were talking to people. It's like we talked to the neighborhood. We talked to folks what they wanted, leaning into partnerships. I mean, there's just an ongoing theme here, which just obviously now is what helped be the part of the impetus behind Denver. Henry, as we wrap up here, I guess we always give the final say to our guests, and I guess what I would say is this: any questions we didn't ask you wish we would have, and of course, if there's anything you want to share, plug, some interesting event that might be coming up, hint, it's up to you. But the floor is yours, please.
Okay, I'll put one last little bit of like word of wisdom, because we've talked about this going to your customers time and time again. But there is a little bit of, danger in that. You've definitely got to validate it. Like at the beginning of Crowdsourced Beers, we built the website to, have users submit beer. Beer has a web page. Web page exists on the internet without any of our vision onto that, because we trusted that people were genuinely good people. And we had some beers get submitted that we caught a ton of heat for as like beers we produced that had, vulgar names and whatnot. So, I will caution it that put some checks and balances in place. It's great to have consumer ideas, and think of it not as one consumer's idea, a collective consumer's consistent idea. That's what you're hunting for. Not just one individual, but tons of people looking for the same or similar thing. So just one word of caution. Don't always just trust the crowd to come up with whatever the heck you do, because that might come and bite you in the ass. Second one, definitely Stout Fest. There it is right there. This is one of my favorite parties of the year. This is our 5th annual Stout Fest, and we call it the sweater party for your insides. We release our barrel-aged Imperial Stout along with 20 plus different stouts, porters that go on tap. So if you're a dark beer lover, this is the 10th of December. Usually happens around that same weekend every year. We've got the Padishaw, which is our bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Stout, and then all the limited release versions we do of that beer. So we age some in Great Lakes Distillery's apple brandy barrels. We have a tequila barrel, a rum barrel, and a Great Lakes barrel-aged gin version of this beer. And then a bunch of different vintage versions of Padishaw as well. Then we do a bunch of fun games throughout the day, some Stout Fest trivia. We make people drink beer, put on mittens, and try to unwrap presents. And it's just a ugly sweater competition, all that fun stuff. So that's Stout Fest coming up on the 10th of December. I'm really excited for that one.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you're promoting it. I see when I was there over the weekend. It's on the screens. It's being promoted everywhere. So, folks, December 10th, Stout Fest. We'll obviously promote this on the podcast. It'll be out before that date. I guess with that said, we're kind of coming to an end here, Henry.
This is great, Henry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would say this. Folks listening, visit MobCraft, drink their beer, go on a bar stool. It's a great beer, nice people, cool vibe, cool location, and a great part of Milwaukee. Obviously, I'm not in Denver, but I hope to visit that location someday. But it's worth the stop. It's worth having their product. They've got some really good things going on. So Henry, we applaud what you're doing. I think you're a great asset to the community, and you've been a fantastic guest. So with that said, folks, this has been Over a Pint with HenrySchwartz from MobCraft. Till next time, cheers.